Muy buenas tardes. Muchas gracias por venir.
So good evening everyone, and thank you for being here once again to Is There Life on Mars on Tuesday, and today we are on Monday, and we are holding this on a Monday. This room is usually full, and especially today because there are high expectations in this event, and it's difficult to find a parallel. The person we're going to have with us today is not only a hero, but also one of the members of our species of the Homo sapiens that has lived longer outside the Earth. And you know that about 135,000 years, one member of our species, Homo sapiens, decided that it was enough of living on the savannas in Africa in their community, and they started roaming the land and discovering new worlds. They discovered new continents, and they opened up new paths of research. Homo sapiens is by nature a traveling species. It's a species that goes beyond borders. And we have with us today one of the individuals that has taken further that instinct to travel, to find new spaces. The US astronaut that has been outside the Earth for longer. One of the human beings that has been away of the atmosphere's protection for longer. A person who's been for almost 1 year in the International Space Station, and who's here to find out whether human beings are able to do it or not. That person is a Homo sapiens sapiens that belongs to that species that has not a name yet, is that species of human beings that have lived beyond our planet. Very few have done it. We're going to meet him right away, but first I will remind you the mechanics and the way this event works. We have a hashtag Vida and Martes, live on Mars, and there you can ask any questions you wish. We'll get them on the phone, and we will answer to those questions with Captain Kelly. And of course, we have our Martians, our Tuesday people. They are young people, innovators, students, workers, and they're going to put Captain Kelly in trouble with their questions. We have Fernando, Natalia, Andrea, Edna, Rodrigo, and Irene, who will be here asking their questions. And you can read them on streaming and find out about everything that's going on here. We're going to start talking. I will not keep talking because I'm looking forward to have Miss Kelly here. Please come over and get a warm welcome from the Telefónica audience.
It is great to be here. Actually, after a year in space, it's great to be anywhere with gravity. You know, on the space station, I changed positions so many times, you would have thought I was running for president. So, to those of you in the audience that do not appear to be space aliens, I'd like to say good evening. And to the rest of you, I come in peace. So what we're going to do today, like he said, is have a conversation and ask, I'll answer your questions. You'll ask the questions. I'll answer some questions. And before we do that, though, I'd like to read a little bit from my book so you can hear it in my own voice. Of course, it'll be translated into Spanish. And then, but that way you don't have to go out and buy a audio version of the book as well. And I'm going to start in the beginning of this book, and the book starts when I get home, and I don't hear the translation in my ear, but I'm assuming it's happening behind the scenes. Maybe I'll put this other headset in. I'm sitting at the head of my dining room table at home in Houston, Texas, finishing dinner with my family, my longtime girlfriend, Amiko, my daughters, Samantha and Charlotte, my twin brother, Mark, his wife, Gabby, his daughter, Claudia, our father, Richie, and Amiko's son, Corbin. It's a simple thing, sitting at a table and eating a meal with those you love, and many people do it every day without giving it much thought. For me, it's something I've been dreaming of for almost a year. I contemplated what it would be like to eat this meal so many times now that I'm finally here. It doesn't seem entirely real. The faces of the people I love that I haven't seen for so long, the chatter of many people talking together, the clink of silverware, the swish of wine in a glass, these are all unfamiliar. Even the sensation of gravity holding in my chair feels strange. And every time I put a glass or fork down on the table, there's a part of my mind that is looking for a dot of Velcro or a strip of duct tape to hold it in place. I've been back on Earth for 48 hours. I push back from the table and struggle to stand up, feeling like an old man getting out of a recliner. Stick a fork in me. I'm done, I announce. Everyone laughs and encourages me to go get some rest, so I do. And a few hours later, I wake up in my bedroom and I write, I struggle to get up, find the edge of the bed, feet down, sit up, stand up. At every stage, I feel like I'm fighting through quicksand. When I'm finally vertical, the pain in my legs is awful. And on top of that pain, I feel something even more alarming. All the blood in my body is rushing to my legs, like the sensation of the blood rushing to your head when you do a headstand, but in reverse. I can feel the tissue in my legs swelling. I shuffle my way to the bathroom, moving my weight from one foot to the other with deliberate effort. Left, right, left, right. I make it to the bathroom, flip on the light, and I look down at my legs. They are swollen and alien stumps. Not legs at all. Are there kids in here? Kids? Kids. Earmuffs. Earmuffs. Oh shit, I say. Hamiko, come look at this. She kneels down and squeezes one ankle and it squishes like a water balloon. She looks up at me with worried eyes. I can't even feel your ankle bone, she says. My skin is burning too, I tell her. She frantically examines me, and I have a strange rash all over my back, the backs of my leg, the back of my head and neck, everywhere I was in contact with the bed. And then there's about 400 more pages to go. Or 365 in this version.
No parece...
Mr. Kelly, it doesn't seem a very appealing way to invite the audience to become astronauts. I don't know whether this is a good piece of advice. After telling this, after reading these paragraphs, were you aware that this could happen to you? That afternoon when you enter this Soyuz space station, the Soyuz to go outer space, did you know about the risks and about the experience?
Risks in flying in space, and I had flown 3 times previously, and the physical effects are something I was sort of familiar with, you know, having spent 159 days in space. But this time, spending nearly a year was much different, much more magnified, and something that not only myself was not considering or expecting, I think even the folks at NASA weren't expecting or considering it either.
¿Hay alguno de esos efectos que...
Do some of those effects still live today?
Pretty much. As far as things that I could feel and, you know, symptoms, I'm back to normal. Now, of course, a lot of things happen to us physiologically in space that we can't feel, like radiation, as an example. I don't know if there's any effects from radiation. Hopefully I'll never find out.
Bueno, se sabrá porque, entre otras cosas, su misión.
Well, your mission has a continuation, a second part, which is the science trials of what's going on, or what happened to your body and what happened to your twin brother's body. We still do not have the results. There are some steps forward, but we don't know what's going to happen. Are there any ideas on what happens to the human body after 1 year in space?
Why we go to, so that's why we go to space, is to learn things. And you know, someday NASA and our international partners, our goal is to go to Mars. It's going to take a long time to get there, much longer than our current experience, So there were a lot of things we need to know, and that's why we did this experiment and this study between Misha and I, my Russian colleague, and also this comparative study with my brother Mark.
No queda ningún efecto.
So there are no symptoms or physical effects. But how about mentally or psychologically? Are there any impacts after spending 1 year in space? Does it last longer? Are you used to being back on Earth again?
What about being back?
Are you used to being back on Earth? On.
I like Earth. I'm used to it.
¿Había visitado alguna vez España? Creo que.
Had you been to Spain before? I think you have.
A number of times, yeah. I was here in Madrid in 1982 when I was in high school. It's probably a lot longer, a lot before a lot of you people were born, I would imagine. Yes, I've been here a number of times.
Me refiero a si la había visitado con los.
I mean, whether you have been with your feet on the ground, because you have visited many times from above. 5 times a year, I think. In one of the turns around the Earth, you visited us above our heads.
We fly over the Earth often, including Spain. That
Eso quiere
is a
decir
fact.
que ustedes vieron unos.
But you saw about over 10,000 sunsets and sunrises?
Every 45 minutes, one or the other.
Y después de haber visto cada 45 minutos.
So after seeing a sunrise and a sunset every 45 minutes, are you still thrilled by sunrises on Earth? Do you still think they are romantic, they are stunning, sitting at home, laying back, stretching your legs and seeing the sunset or rise? Or you just don't do it anymore?
Yeah, I like sunrises and sunsets. I prefer the sunsets to the sunrises because you don't have to get up as early. Believe it or not, they are, they last longer than the ones in space. The ones in space are incredible, beautiful, unique in their own way, but on Earth even more so and last much longer.
Estamos aquí entre otras cosas.
We are here today among other things because we want to find about your book. And by the way, we're going to have a video. And this book is deeply related to one of the journalists I admire the most, one of the person I admire the most in my profession, Tom Wolfe. Let's watch the video first on the book, and then we'll speak about how everything came up.
The surprise video.
Sí, nos lo pone en el book trailer de la editorial. Gracias.
Probably as being in a place that is isolated, remote, risky, challenging, is something that requires endurance.
My third Christmas in space.
Well, Merry Christmas.
So the title of this book is Endurance, A Year in Space, A Lifetime of Discovery. This was the longest space flight by an American, so it seemed like an apt title. But it also applies to my life in a lot of ways. I wasn't much of a student, actually, my whole life from kindergarten to my first year of college. It was impossible for me to pay attention and do my homework. I just happened to be walking across campus one day, and I go into the bookstore to buy something, and I saw this book on the shelf, and I bought it, went back to my room, and read it from, beginning to end. The book was The Right Stuff by Tom Wolfe, and, the way Tom described the pilots and the test pilots, I felt like I had some of the traits that they had. I felt I had things in common with them, even though I was this 18-year-old kid that couldn't do his homework. But, that book made me decide right then and there I was going to try my best to be like these guys. At the time, it seemed like a giant leap. But with a little luck and timing and, preparation and perseverance, I was able to do some pretty accomplished things.
It's on one word go for deviation. The gate is closed and the slider is locked.
Untie that wire tie, just one twist.
You know, the adrenaline rush is pretty addictive. You know, you're riding on a rocket, 7 million pounds of thrust, and it can blow up. I mean, that's what excited me about this job. I don't see myself as a hero. I'm a guy that had this very lofty goal that came from humble beginnings and, you know, had some pretty large mountains to climb. But I feel very strongly that if you can dream it, you can do it.
Puedes hacerlo.
Good job.
Gracias.
Good job on that video.
You can dream it, you can do it. Thank you.
Lo mencionaban.
It was said on the video. The reading the right stuff inspired your career as an astronaut, and you had the chance to phone Tom Wolfe, the author from space. How was the conversation? What do you tell each other?
So this book is not just about a guy spending a year in space. Like the video said, it's about a kid that couldn't do his homework, found some inspiration in a book called The Right Stuff by Tom Wolfe, and then with a little bit of hard work and a lot of endurance and never giving up, was able to achieve some remarkable things. So I felt obligated to call Tom when I was in space and talk to him and thanked him for his inspiration that allowed me to do what I was able to do. But interesting how my career and inspiration started with a book, and now we're talking about a book. But yeah, I talked to Tom from space. It was a great conversation. He wanted to know mostly about, you know, what it's like living on the space station.
Como buen periodista.
As a good journalist, he did want to know that. And he probably gave you a piece of advice. If you're to tell a story, start from the beginning. But there can be many different beginnings. I'll start with my own beginning. The one that shocked me the most when I read your book. And then we'll speak about your childhood. But to me, the beginning is that moment at the corridor towards the Soyuz. And that's, and you look at your partner, your children, your brother for the last time. You see them on the other side of the glass, and you know that you wouldn't see them in 1 year. And you were about to sit in a rocket with tons of fuel that could go off at any moment. So how was that very moment? What can you recall now?
You know, yeah, the last time you leave your family on Earth, you do it through a pane of glass. So it's very impersonal. It's also in public. So I don't recall a lot about it other than just saying, see you later.
¿Y qué cree que pensaban ellos? ¿Eran conscientes?
What do you think they were thinking? Were they aware of the risks you were about to take? They thought you were going to go on adventures without really knowing what was going on?
Well, you know, things are risky, and we do everything, you know, risky stuff in our lives every day, whether it's driving in a car or walking across the street. And in this case, you know, flying in space is risky. In both the Soyuz and the space shuttle, we've had 2 fatal accidents. In the case of the space shuttle, in 140 missions, we lost 2 space shuttles. So that's a 1 in 70 chance of dying. So it is risky, but you weigh the benefit. You know, just like you do driving a car. You need to get somewhere. You know it's risky, but it's more important that you get to where you're going than stay at home because of the risk. Same thing, flying in space, something you believe very strongly in, you understand the risk. You know, we do our best to make the risk as low as possible, but you decide to do it and move on.
En aquel camino
On your way towards Soyuz, there were something that was not expected, something that was not on the program, and that went actually against the security protocols, which is a last hug to your brother Mark.
The Russian cosmonauts are quite, and their management are quite, at certain times, surprisingly generous. And on both of my Soyuz flights, they let my brother be on the bus with me going out to the launch pad, which was unexpected. Kind of nice.
Porque efectivamente su hermano.
Because actually your brother was the one part of the mission, almost just like you. He was also part of the mission almost at your same level, but he stayed here.
What I did. Because he was in Tucson, Arizona watching television.
Un poco menos arriesgado, pero
yes, a little bit less risky though. But I guess you have talked to him many times about it, about the other side of this mission, about his view. Were you jealous, or was he jealous, or was it just natural? Was he supporting you? Because the person who stays on Earth must see this differently, doesn't he?
Supportive. You mean of the science and doing the? Yeah. He was very supportive of doing this, and he recognized the value in it and was behind it 100%.
Ahí en ese momento volvemos.
So going back to that moment, I guess when a U.S. astronaut goes to the city of stars in Moscow and then in Kazakhstan, things must be quite shocking. Finding a completely different way of doing the space career. To what point were you shocked by the way they do things before launching in Russia?
Russian space agency has to deal with a much smaller budget. So, a lot of times, understandably, they do things that are, with cost in mind. So where there's like a practical, cheap solution that'll work, they generally go with it. I've been incredibly impressed with their professionalism and their ability to do and fly in space with much less means than other countries do. And sometimes there's a little humor involved with doing it that way too. I talk about it in the book. Like as an example, we wear this spacesuit, this so-called spacesuit, and it's basically like a fire-resistant suit that the pressure volume. So if you lose pressurization, the volume is basically just a plastic bag that you're in with a helmet, and you get in the bag in the front, and then the bag is sealed with some elastic bands. You get the space, and the garbage bags they use and the rubber bands to seal the garbage are the same exact ones from the spacesuit. But they both work.
¿Y por qué comían tanto en él?
And what were you eating so much dill up there? Why were you eating so much dill? Dill. Why so much dill in your diet?
Well, because at one time their diet consisted of much like potatoes and vodka. And apparently those two things together create a lot of gas. And dill gets rid of gas. You can look it up if you don't believe me.
Sí. No es bueno ir al espacio.
So it's not a good idea to go to space after a gas-rich diet, right? So it's not good advice.
Rocket fuel. I'm talking about another kind of gas. One that is not as helpful in space as rocket fuel.
Lo que sí es cierto es que antes de entrar.
One thing that's true is that before entering Soyuz or any other rocket and risking your life and spending 1 year, that superstation also work? Do you do things to wish yourself luck? Mission after mission, I think from Yuri Gagarin, they're doing the same thing. Can you tell us about these traditions, so to say?
I don't have any personal superstitions, but NASA has some, and the Russian Space Agency definitely has some. You know, as an example, in Houston, in Florida, when we're getting ready to launch on the Soyuz, we have to play a round of poker. And it's like a low ball poker, so you win by getting the lowest hand. And the commander of the space shuttle has to lose a hand before you can walk out the building to go launch on the rocket. The idea being, if he loses the hand of cards, he's expended all of his bad luck. You know, Russians have similar traditions. We stop the bus in the same spot that Yuri Gagarin stopped the bus to urinate before he got into the rocket, so we get out of the spacecraft and pee on the tire before we go into space. So it's traditions on both sides.
Le funcionó a Yuri Gagarin y porque
So Yuri Gagarin was thrilled about that and excited, so why change? We also have Enrique Flores with us today. Enrique Flores is that gentleman sitting over there and taking notes very carefully. He's not actually taking notes. Let's take a look at what he's doing, because throughout this event, Enrique will be drawing what's going on here. And he's a skilled drawer.
Looks like I didn't take too much.
Y os recuerdo que podéis seguir enviando vuestras.
So I remind you that you can still send your questions with hashtag Vida and Martes, and we will ask them during this conversation. So let's go back to the beginning, Mr. Captain. Let's go back, all the way back. Not just to the corridor I mentioned before. Let's go back to your childhood. You mentioned that before, and there might be young people here who can see themselves in this story. I can't hardly believe it, but you were a bad student, and we have always heard that astronauts are at the top of students, and they used to be the brightest students in school. And is it not always that way?
Well, that was not my experience, and you know, like you said, most people think of an astronaut, you're the smartest kid in the class, you get straight A's. I was the opposite of that. I, you know, spent more time looking out the window or looking at the clock, trying to will it to run faster than I ever did paying attention. And I think if I was a kid today, I'd probably, you know, be the kid with ADD or ADHD. And like I said, it wasn't until I found the book, The Right Stuff, that made me think, you know, if I can fix that one thing, maybe I can go fly airplanes and spaceships again, or spaceships in my future. So, yeah, I came from a very non-traditional background to become an astronaut. I think it's a good example. It's not the easy way, I'll tell you that. It's hard to spend your first 12 years of your education not paying attention and then having to catch up. But it is possible.
Pero sí tenían tanto usted como su.
So both you and your friend and your brother Mark had an important skill for an astronaut, which is the ability to go for adventure, to take on risks since you were a child, to be a little bit naughty and not to take in the set rules and go beyond constantly. Because I think you were naughty, right? And
like N-A-U-G-H.
Yeah. Yes, you weren't. You didn't behave perfectly.
Yeah. You mean we were like incorrigible? We were troublemakers?
More or less.
Yeah, that's probably better description.
¿Se ajusta a su perfil?
Yes.
Does it fit your profile? You and your brothers, were you like that?
Yeah, I think we're both recovering delinquents.
Y hasta poner en riesgo su salud en algún.
To the point to run risks for your health, right? Physically, you were you had some problems.
Risk, I think, is important in life, you know, whether it's launching on a spaceship or taking a risk to getting a job that you don't think you're capable of. And, I talk to a lot of people around the world, and often I find people that they say, I don't want to do that. I'm worried about, I'm not going to get accepted. I'm going to fail. I think you find in the people I talk to that are been very successful in their lives, this one trait that they have is in common is they're not afraid of failure. To see exactly, what you can achieve. And that was always the case in my life. I wasn't always the best at everything I did, especially in the beginning. But eventually, I got pretty good at things. And, it involved not giving up. I joined the Navy. I wasn't a particularly good pilot at first, but I stuck with it. And, years later, I landed the space shuttle. So I think, my life has been an example of, how good you are when you start something. There's really no reflection on how good you can become with, hard work and perseverance. Resistencia.
Lo que tampoco se sabe muy bien es a qué se...
And when you don't know, when you don't know before going to a one-year mission, is what you're going to face. There is a very hard preparation before. Your knowledge of space was very thorough because of your previous missions. But once you're there might be quite surprising things, such as obvious things, such as smells, scents. And you describe this on your book. You were shocked by the smell of the station when you entered the first time.
Well, I wanted this book to be a book that someone could read it and feel like they were on the space station, or feel like they experienced certain things that I got to experience. And I think the way you do that is being, creative in your nonfiction writing, and, letting people not tell them the story, but show them the story and let them know what things smell like, sound like, look like, feel like. So that's why there's a lot of examples in this book about how things taste, how they smell. You touch it, what does it feel like? So, and I think it worked, because I think a lot of folks said that a lot of the reviews I read, they felt like they were right there with me.
De hecho, las primeras
In fact, the first question that we are getting from our audience through the Twitter, were almost all these questions are about this chores in the International Spaceship. For example, one of the people from the audience, Alex, asks you if during your stay there you had any kind of disease, for example, just a cold. And how can you deal with that when it happens in the space? What happens in that case?
Get sick. Yeah, so we had a system of quarantine where we try to, avoid people getting any kind of illness before they launch, because you wouldn't want to have the flu or even congestion. In space, with no gravity, all the fluid in your body shifts upward. So if you had a cold, you normally get a lot of help from gravity for draining your sinuses. That wouldn't happen in space, so it's not a great place to have a cold. But generally, we have a quarantine system that keeps germs away from the space station. But at times it doesn't work, and we have an incredible amount of medical equipment, anywhere from being able to suture people to advanced cardiac life support drugs, psychotic drugs, painkillers. I mean, a lot of stuff that is regulated by the DEA in the United States, stuff with special labels. There's certain things that we can go into ourselves, others where we need the ground's permission. So we have pretty good capability to treat ourselves if required.
Cuando un profano
is when someone that doesn't know about anything like us, for example, we think about how life in the space is. We always think about the same. How do you sleep? How do you eat? Maybe we could speak about this chores, but maybe there are other aspects where people don't think about them. For example, aspects like that some of the people from the crew teach others how to cut their hair, and when they are there are some accidents with it.
You teach others how to do what?
to haircut.
Oh, haircuts. I don't know anything about that.
Sí, estamos hablando de un acontecimiento.
Yeah, we're speaking about an event that happened with
Space. It's called none.
No fue su caso.
It was not your case. But there's a previous preparation to do that if that's necessary.
Astronauts deal with their hair in space, and I didn't want any part of it.
¿Cómo se ve?
So how do you see, what do you see from the Earth when you're up there? Up to what extent it is, I mean, can you identify things, fires, pollution, lights from cities, or is it some kind of something blurry that you can't identify?
The Earth is incredibly beautiful from space. There's no doubt, and we live on a very beautiful planet. It's very blue in most places. Also, a lot of beautiful yellows, oranges, red colors of the desert. Believe it or not, a lot of places people live, where most of the people live, that has a lot of green vegetation and foliage, doesn't really transmit through the atmosphere so well. So the places that are like really strikingly beautiful are the tropical waters and the deserts. Other things are obvious. One is our atmosphere is incredibly thin, like a film on, like maybe a contact lens over somebody's eye. And it's just shocking. When you fly in an airplane at like 35,000 feet, most of the atmosphere is below you. And that's where we dump all these pollutants into, a very, very small volume. People look up at the sky and they think it looks infinitely large. It is not. It is a very enclosed environment, and definitely looks fragile from Earth. There's parts of Earth that are almost always covered in pollution in eastern China and India. I would think that there are kids that live in some of these countries that if you asked them what color the sky was, they'd say, gray or brown, not blue. You see fires. When I was in space, there were a lot of fires in the western United States. Turns out there's a lot of fires in the western United States now on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. Weather patterns that you see that you wouldn't expect to see them in certain places. So, we live on an incredibly beautiful planet, yet we definitely have some issues to deal with. Not just climate issues, but we're talking about the climate right now.
Pero yo no sé si...
Yes, but I don't know if from out there, with a powerful lens, with binoculars or some technology, is it possible to appreciate even your house, the town you live in, to identify, well, I'm seeing my family and wave your hand, thinking or wishing that they could see you?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Well, sometimes, for example, at the book, you explain that you could even play to send some messages, to imagine that they could see you, that your family could see you from the Earth. Is it possible to see what's going on at your city or at your country? Maybe your family is there right at that moment in time.
Can you see people on Earth?
No la gente.
From space?
No, not people. Yeah, for example, or the city.
See them on a video screen. The things you could see with your naked eye, with no magnification from the space station, basically runways, airports. That's about it. You can see a city and tell it's a city, but you can't tell like individual buildings. But airports are generally easy to recognize because they contrast with the dark background of the city they're around, and generally they're on the outskirts of cities. I think that was your question. I was having a really hard time understanding what he was saying. That close enough?
Perfectamente.
Right.
Yeah, perfectly. That was the best answer. Okay, so how frequently you had contact with your family? How frequently you were able to call or to get a call from them?
So we have a telephone on board the space station. It's like a Skype phone, like a computer application, and you can use it whenever you want, assuming we have a communication link, which is probably about 75-80% of the time, maybe a little more. You can always call home, or anybody for that matter. We have video conferences on the weekends. We have email. So the connectivity is pretty good. You never feel like you're completely disconnected from your family and Earth. And in some ways, for them, it's good. They always know what we're doing. You know, they know where we are, you know. The only disadvantage is they can't call us. It's a one-way. You can only call out, which in some ways is kind of nice. Sorry.
Y durante estas conversaciones,
And during these conversations, what was the worst and the best piece of news that they told you from the Earth during that year?
News
¿sí?
that I have ever gotten?
Sí. Ahí, estando allí.
When you were there in the space,
You know, the worst news I ever got was my sister-in-law, who was a congresswoman in Tucson, Arizona, was shot in the head, and 6 people were killed, including a 10-year-old girl, and another bunch of other people were injured. And I was in space, and I had a few months left in front of me to, you know, spend there. I couldn't come home.
Y la mejor
and the best piece of news?
The best piece of news that I had ever gotten in space? No one has ever asked me that question. What's the best piece of news? That is a tough one.
Bueno.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the best piece of news I ever got in space was during the end of my year in space, and I got an email from my daughter Charlotte's teacher. Charlotte was 12, and the email said how Charlotte was made the captain of the team on the playground. So in the U.S., that means, you know, there's 2 teams they pick. The captain gets to pick all the other kids that are going to be on the team. And Charlotte was made the captain for the first time. And the first kid she picked for her team was the kid in her class that had disabilities, a special needs kid. And her teacher wrote me and said how proud she was of Charlotte for doing that. I called Charlotte that night. I said, hey, I'm very proud of you for doing that. What were you thinking? And she says, you know, Dad, that kid gets picked last every single time. So he deserved to be picked first once. That's why she took him with her first pick. The first time she was ever allowed to choose somebody. That was the best news from Earth.
Eso quiere decir que se puede.
So this means that it is possible to be a father, an educator, and control, and from out there to give advice, despite being 400 kilometers away.
Yeah, but it's not advice that they can choose to accept it or not, because there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. That doesn't involve cutting off the credit card. It's really the only thing you can do.
Y desde allá arriba se pueden.
And from out there, is it possible to send presents or gifts? Is it possible to know that it's someone's birthday, to organize a surprise, or do you have time to do that?
You do. You have people on the ground that help you, but we have an internet connection that's good enough that I bought things on Amazon from space. Bought airline tickets. I've done some banking, but it takes some patience, but it's possible.
Okay, so we've been chatting for half an hour, a little bit more, and I think that it is time to our Martians start work hard, because this is why they are here. We have the second row. I don't know who wants to get started. Fernando, Natalia, Andrea. Please stand up and make the first question to the captain. Hello, good afternoon. Thanks for the mic. And I would like to ask you, to see the Earth from space, does it make you think that we are insignificant in that immensity, or does it make you think that we have accomplished great things as a species?
I think it depends on your perspective. Like, I would say, you know, looking out at the window of the space station at Earth and considering, you know, how our civilization has developed and how far we've come, and the fact that we have people that have been living in space for 17 years, it's an impressive achievement. You know, on the other hand, if you consider how many stars there are in the universe, it makes you feel pretty insignificant, right? So I just think it depends on your reference frame. You know, I do strongly feel, though, we have incredible capacity to do some amazing things, and that's hopeful, even despite maybe our insignificance sometimes.
Una más.
One more? So after this interesting conversation that you have held, I would like you to explain us a little bit more what you say in your book. Will you speak about some effects that zero gravity had on your body, in your capacity to see? And you say that these effects are different in women rather and in men. I would like you to elaborate on that a little bit more.
It's issue for long duration space flyers where it seems like the fluid shift that occurs in the absence of gravity creates a increased intracranial pressure that affects their vision. Astronauts get swelling of the optic nerve. These things called choroidal folds, this part that nourishes our retina, is damaged. And the concern is that you wouldn't want to get to Mars and have astronauts that can't see well. And well, interestingly enough, this only happens in men. Now, we fly a lot more men into space, so maybe it's just we haven't had enough of a sample of women to find a woman that has this issue. And it could also be that maybe women just don't experience this, in which case maybe when we send crew members to Mars, it'll be a crew of all women.
Bueno, la pregunta era realmente...
Well, the fascinating question, yeah, Fernando. That was a fascinating question because it's linked to one of the most important parts of the mission that the captain established there, that was science. Captain Kelly, when you spend a year in the space, well, a third part of this time, you spend doing science. And this science starts to give some interesting results about how the body is affected when you live in space. For example, something very simple. You came from space with your cells a little bit, between inverted commas, younger than your brothers that was on the Earth. Why was this?
Relativity's perspective?
No, hablo más bien de cómo los telómeros.
Yeah. We did a lot of research between my brother and I because we're 99% genetically the same. And there was this one experiment on our telomeres, which our telomeres are these things on the ends of our chromosomes. It's like caps that are an indication of your physical age. So as we age, they get shorter, they get more frayed, damaged. And me being in space, radiation, stressful environment, microgravity, this hypothesis was my telomeres would get worse compared to my brothers, but what they saw was the exact opposite. They got better compared to his on Earth. So, it's one data point, but it's interesting science when you have a hypothesis that's one thing and what you learn is the exact opposite.
Because what's clear is that being at space has important effects on a short term. Since the very beginning when you're there, there are important effects on your body. For example, when you sleep, it's much more complicated to sleep there than here. And that must have an effect on your health.
I wouldn't say it's more comfortable than on Earth to sleep in space. I think that's kind of there's a misconception there that when you're floating, because you're floating, it would necessarily be more comfortable for you to sleep. Certainly, there are pains that you might have when you sleep on Earth that you wouldn't have in space. Like if you have I have shoulder issues, so I often sleep on my arm, and it can hurt my shoulders and elbows. You don't have that in space, but you have other pains. You might have, your spine elongates, so maybe your back hurts. I used to have to sleep in space with my knees as high up as I could to alleviate the back pain. But the main thing that makes sleeping in space more difficult and less appealing is that when we are living our daily lives on Earth, whether we're walking around or sitting here on these chairs or you're at work, whatever you're doing, you're opposing gravity all day. And then when you go home at night, you might lie on the couch, you're more comfortable than you were when you're walking around. When you lie in your bed and you feel the pressure of the blanket and you're more comfortable because now you're lying down. These are all things that help you go to sleep. But in space, you don't have that. When it's time to go to sleep, you know, you're floating all day like this. Basically, when it's time to go to sleep, you just close your eyes. So for me, it's, you know, there's certain aspects to it that are appealing, but I much prefer to sleep in a bed.
¿Y qué son esas?
And what about those little lights that astronauts saw at space? Why do they take place?
So we also, in space, we get hit with a lot of radiation, whether it's solar radiation or cosmic radiation. Cosmic radiation comes from outside of our solar system. And you can see the cosmic radiation when your eyes are closed. It's like little lights, flashes of light in your field of view. And that's kind of a distraction when you're going to sleep. I flew my first flight to Hubble Space Telescope, which is almost twice as high as the space station. You see a lot more cosmic radiation there. It's a little disturbing because not only are you seeing this flash of light, but you also are realizing that cosmic ray just went right through my eye and my brain.
Well, if you agree, let's see what Enrique Flores is doing. Let's turn the camera on while some of the Martians raises his or her hand. And let's see, Enrique, how are you doing? What are you doing? Oh, you can see it, Mr. Kelly. I hope we are giving good headlines for you. Okay, so next Martian. Okay, so during your stay at the International Spaceship, you performed many investigations with mice, for example. Which one was the most interesting for you?
Study on this mission. Science experiment. So for me, you know, I'm not a scientist. I operate the experiments. Look at myself more as an engineer and a pilot. I think one study that is often overlooked is just the whole space station as an individual experiment in being able to have people live and work in space for long periods of time. And we've been doing this experiment since 2000, October of 2000, when the first crew launched to the International Space Station. We've been doing it successfully for the last 18 years. So I think that's, you know, for me, that's the most interesting experiment of them all. The fact that this space station is just one big experiment. You know, on a personal level, I kind of liked working with the rodents. The mice we had on board, we were doing some experiments with them just because it's very exacting work, very tedious. Took a lot of thought and time, and yeah, it was fun watching those guys run around too.
I don't know, Captain, if you got attached to those rodents, because apart from human beings, the other living people or things that were there were rodents. Do you get attached to them?
You can relate to them because when they get to space, they don't look good at first. They're not comfortable. They kind of look a lot like we do when you first get up there, but then over time they move around better. They look healthier. But you don't get so attached to them that you don't do your job with them, which is to, you know, do some experiments on them.
Okay, so some of our Martians are asking many different things. And there's someone that is asking the following. If you watch movies at space, for example, do you sit down to watch a movie?
For anything. No, but we did watch. Yeah, I've watched a lot of movies in space. The Martian and Gravity. Watching gravity in space is like watching a movie of your house burning down while you're inside of it. Okay.
Cuando un astronauta...
So when you watch Gravity, what do you think? Do you find that it is realistic? Do you think that it's similar to real life? Do you think that everything is unreal?
Big movie. I mean, a lot of the physics is wrong, but if you overlook that, it's very entertaining. The space station, they did a great job making it look like it really does. I mean, very, very close. Movies that aren't technically accurate don't bother me because, you know, the first priority, I think, of a movie is to entertain people. They want people to be entertained. And, you know, being physically, scientifically accurate is a lower priority.
Nos pregunta...
Laura, in the audience, is asking, do you have parties at the station? Do you celebrate any parties sometimes or not?
We celebrate like different holidays and birthdays. New Year's Eve is a big one because, you know, it's an international space station and not everyone has Christmas as a holiday. And if you do, it's not necessarily on the same day. The Russians celebrate Christmas in January in an Orthodox calendar. So, you know, you celebrate people's birthdays, big events like crews arriving or departing, spacewalks, you know, and some holidays that we share.
Muy bien, tenemos más marcianos.
Okay, we have more Martians that want to ask you something. Yeah, my question is a little bit, yes. I want to ask you about, well, the book you said that from the station you can clearly see the polluted areas in the Earth. So how do you think that, for example, if we could get to Mars and we could colonize it, do you think it would be a good idea? Don't you think that we should take care of our planet before going to a different planet?
Great idea to someday going to Mars and colonizing Mars. But I do not think Mars is any kind of a lifeboat for Earth. We will always be able to live here a lot easier than we'll be able to live anywhere else. And we need to take care of this planet. We're never going to find anything better than this. But we have to act, and act soon. We're not going to erase the damage that's been done to the climate. We can only stop it from getting worse, which is definitely needs to be a priority. And you know, I want to apologize to you guys on behalf of my fellow countrymen that, you know, the United States is no longer a leader in this area. You know, we are clearly, we're not even a follower. We're just sitting on the bench, and it's embarrassing.
Lo cual, capitán, no deja de ser sorprendente.
So it's surprising because it's the leader country in scientific research, and all scientists agree on the fact that we have to do something to stop the planet's deterioration. Why don't you convey that idea to all politicians? It's a mystery that we cannot understand.
I think we need more people in government, especially in the U.S., that have scientific backgrounds, that their goal is not to get elected and reelected, and, you know, this becomes their thing just to stay in office, but have people that believe in data and science and, you know, be our representatives and our voice. And we just don't have enough of that. We have too many politicians and not enough people.
A pesar de que ahora mismo...
Well, despite that, Donald Trump has said that the U.S. is going to be back to the moon. Well, it seems that they believe on space. Do you believe that? That Donald Trump will take an U.S. astronaut to the moon.
It's every time we get a new president, we get a new plan, which is not good. But in this case, not only did we get a new plan, but we also got a budget cut. and we have no NASA administrator for the last year. So I don't believe that it's serious at all. Personally, I have no problem with us going back to the moon if we had an unlimited amount of money. The issue we have is we just always change directions and wind up wasting money and time. I would like to see NASA at some point be funded at like 10 years and a plan that you cannot change, something that is put into law where, this type of work we do is so long lead stuff that we have to have a stable budget and a stable plan. But yeah, I don't really put much faith in us going to the moon anytime soon. Maybe we'll fly around it, which will be cool with Orion, but landing on it, I'm not too optimistic.
Lo cual es...
So that's a little bit important for the space missions, because the moon could be the first step to go to Mars. Or do you think that technology will be enough to overlook the moon and to think about going to Mars directly in 1 or 2 generations?
Do I think we should go to Mars directly? Yeah, I think if we don't have the amount of money to do both, that should be our goal. Absolutely.
¿Y eso cuándo va a ocurrir?
And when will that happen? In 10, 15, 20, 50 years?
When I was on the space station, I was asked, now that NASA has found liquid water on Mars, will that help us get to Mars sooner? I said, I don't know, maybe. Now if we found money on Mars, then we get there really fast. So that's what we need is money. My brother says, getting to Mars is not about rocket science. It's about political science. I think we know a lot of what we need to know to get there. Some challenges with radiation. Some of the systems have to be probably more robust, but our big challenge is political will and funding.
Nos pregunta Luis.
We have a question from Luis Ferreira from the audience. With your experience in the ISS, and speaking about going to Mars, what is the main barrier to get there? Is it a physical barrier, or is it a mental one, a psychological one?
I would say after that, it's, radiation, I would say, so physical. When you get away from the magnetic field of the Earth, you get a lot more radiation. We need to be able to protect the crew, either by some kind of shielding or maybe just getting there faster.
Muy bien, tenemos también otra marciana que tiene ya el micrófono.
We have another Martian with a microphone in the hand. Well, my question is about personal issues. Apart from your family and friends, what do you miss the most from Earth when you were out there? And once you were back, what were you missing from space?
You miss the weather, nature, sun, rain, wind. You can't go outside, you don't walk around in the grass. So you miss those things. And what I miss about space, I miss the work, doing something that's technically challenging, that has serious complications if you mess it up. And I miss the people that I was up there with. So even though those people are back on Earth, most of them, actually one of them went up again. He's up there now, but, I miss the people that I was there with. It's interesting that my fellow crewmate Gennady Padalka says about astronauts, he says, when we are on Earth, we wish to be in space, and when we're in space, we wish to be on Earth. I can feel that.
Visto desde allá arriba.
So you said that from up there, all the beauty of, you told us about all the beauty of the Earth. Is there your favorite point on Earth for you? Because we all have our favorite postcard of the Earth. So from up there, what's the most beautiful place to your mind?
The Bahamas is so blue and expansive that that's one of my favorites. Certainly the deserts are beautiful. It's interesting that the places that are most attractive aesthetically are the places where people generally don't live, in the water and in a desert. But they just look very striking from space. Whereas, you know, a lot of places you would say, oh, that's the best area to live in because of the climate, like Southern California, for instance, is from space not very remarkable looking.
Otra pregunta de un marciano.
Another question from Martian. Evening. Here's my question. Having spent so long in space with a multi-ethnic population and a reduced amount of people, did you create an identity, a group identity, some bonds with these people? Do you have like your own space culture?
Yeah, you definitely, you know, doing something that's very complicated, something very risky in a very enclosed environment for long periods of time, absolutely brings people much, much closer together. And that's one of the great things about this space station program, is it can take former enemies and make them friends in space, doing something that they both feel very strongly and passionate about.
De hecho, posiblemente es...
Actually, this might be the only place on Earth where this can happen. And it is not even on Earth, the ISS. There was a project at some point called Freedom. It could have been called Alpha or something else. But that building, the most important thing the human being has built, is actually a symbol, an example that the Earth can, we on Earth can live together in harmony. It's a shame that it's so far away from us.
It came through as kind of a statement.
La pregunta es si efectivamente eso...
So the question is whether you could feel this, whether you could feel that you could live together with people from other countries and create this solidarity.
Absolutely. That is what we do.
¿Tenemos todavía alguna pregunta más de los marcianos?
Some more questions from our Martians still pending. Second round. I would like to know what you think about Elon Musk's project to take us to Mars. You already said that you don't see it happening soon, but what do you think about your job turning into tourism, about astronauts turning into tourists?
Launch a rocket into space and have the first stage come back and land vertically on a barge or on land. I said, hey, he's crazy. That's not going to happen. And he did it like 14 times now. Relaunched one of those first stages into space. So I will never say again that Elon is crazy. I think his Mars plan, I would say, is ambitious. But it is also good to be ambitious, right? And he and others, I think, are on the cusp of providing access to space, whether it's suborbital space or low Earth orbit, for many, many more people. And I think we're going to see that in the next few years. We were Miko and I were recently at Blue Origin, which is Jeff Bezos' company. I've been to SpaceX too, but it's been a number of years. But Blue Origin, you know, they're trying to put tourists in suborbital flight, ballistic flight. They are not kidding around, and they will be doing this very soon. I would suspect probably this year, from what I can tell.
Bien, estamos ya a punto de terminar, solamente.
So we're about to finish, and we have just a few questions left. It's just very quick ones. Someone from the audience is asking whether you prefer Star Wars or Star Trek.
Star Wars.
Otra muy rápida.
Another quick one. Would you go back?
I would go back to space. Yeah.
¿Y volvería a estar?
And would you spend another year in space?
For another year, yeah. Yeah.
Otra muy rápida que nos hace.
Another quickie. If one of your daughters wanted to be an astronaut, would you take that idea away from their head, or you would support them?
Tough one. I'd probably reluctantly encourage them. You know, it's a risky job. You don't want to.
Pues con esto hemos terminado. Son las...
We're done with this. It's 20 minutes after 8. And we have to tell you that you have now the chance to have your copies signed. You can buy your book and have it signed by Mr. Kelly himself right here on the second floor. And Scott Kelly is an astronaut because he's got a specific system to sign copies where he doesn't miss one single second. And it's very effective. And he's a great communicator. He's told me, before we close, let me speak again and summarize with a few sentences everything we've said with this conversation. So now it's the time, Captain Kelly, to summarize what we've been saying.
As what we discussed here tonight, but what I wanted to leave you was with one final thought. You know, after me spending 500 days of my life on the International Space Station, and I'm in the Soyuz, and I'm backing away from it, knowing I would never be there again. And I'm looking out at the truss, this metal truss shining in the bright sunlight. And I'm thinking, you know, we built this space station, 1 million pounds, size of a football field, while flying around the Earth at 17,500 miles an hour in a vacuum, in extremes of temperatures of plus or minus 270 degrees. Built by this international partnership of 15 countries, different languages, different cultures, different engineering ways of doing things. This space station, the hardest thing we have ever done. Absolutely. And if we can do this, we can do anything. You know, if we want to go to Mars, we can go to Mars. If we want to cure cancer and put the resources behind it, we can do that. If we want to fix the problems with our environment, you know, challenges that we have in the United States, challenges that you guys have in Europe and other places around the world. After spending a year in space, I was absolutely inspired that if we can dream it, we can do it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you. Good.